And here we are for another episode of The Anarchist and the Moderate.
I'm the anarchist and he's the moderate.
Oh, we're changing positions today.
Just kidding. Joke.
So I guess today we were going to start things off asking whether enforcement is really a good way to go here in London, Ontario. Recently, the London police announced they're going to start enforcing against drug use on the streets. They haven't really been having this policy for quite a while. There have been a lot of complaints in the community, more broadly, but especially in the Old East, about open drug use, paraphernalia, that sort of thing. People don't want to see it. People seem to be also at the same time opposing safe injection sites. So they don't want to see it. They don't want to deal with the mess and bother, but they also don't want to go along with a safe alternative. So it looks like it's funny too, because one of the common complaints that I heard at recent meetings was people don't want to pay for things to help the people on the street. They don't want to increase their taxes or pay towards any of the more progressive ideas to help people. But they seem determined to pay more in policing fees, policing salaries, which, as our good friend Kevin knows, there's quite a few police making quite a few dollars when you start adding things all up in London, Ontario.
And they need that second armored vehicle because just having one isn't enough for a city of 400,000 or...
You know, it's the thing to do these days. But maybe this is part of the plan, right? They want to bust people on the street for drowning their misery while they're languishing on the streets.
Criminalizing poverty,
Yeah.
If you have money, then you don't have to worry. But if you don't have money, you're on the street, then you're going to end up in jail or behind bars. Because a lot of people, once they get on the street to cope, they either take drugs or drink, and they're already in a super vulnerable position. People are becoming homeless every day because they're being rent evicted, or Ford took away rent control, so their rent's being jacked up, and who can afford like $1,850 for a one-bedroom apartment in the city? Like not too many people can afford that. According to marketplace research they did, the average income $60,000 in Canada. That means if you're spending 30% of your income on rent, you only have $1,500 a month, the average person, to put towards rent, or that's what you're supposed to be putting towards rent. And we know that in London you can't even get a place for $1,700. If you're on minimum wage, you have $700 to $800 a month to put towards rent. Obviously, you're not going to have a place. If you're a senior, things are tight. If you're going to school, student, things are tough. And if you're on OWODSP, you're not going to find a place. So, it's class warfare, and the middle class and poor are being, savagely attacked, and we need to fight back somehow. And this is part of, having a talk about this is important, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's a place to start, right? To sort of get our heads around what's happening out there. I mean, a lot of this has been happening all along for decades. The poor getting pushed around and criminalized, and always having the least. And there's always been a lowest level of poverty where people do get exposed to vulnerable positions. But today, it's like almost every time I'm out there, there's more and more people. it's just a growing sea of misery right out there. And like, I don't know, man, it makes me feel old. When I was young, that was a thing that happened in American big cities, not in London, Ontario. And now, I mean, they're everywhere, pushing shopping carts and carrying bags and just full of desperation and misery. And the worst part, the really worst part, is just the lack of hope. You know, if you ever go back and see or read stuff from the Depression era, there was a lot of misery then, for sure. A lot of desperation, but people tended to have a sense that things were going to get better. People tended to think that at some point it was going to turn around and things would pick up. You know, they would have hope that there might be something going on for their kids at some point. Something to work towards, something to fight for. Today, there's just a lot less of that sense. There's a lot of people who just feel that hope has been extinguished, that the corporate forces are encircling any of that hope and just snuffing it. They have us under siege from every angle now. They own all the political parties. They like, one of the issues that's fueling homelessness, at least in my neighborhood, is the just escalating rent. Even if none of the other issues were around, just the astronomical rent escalation in the last few years just endangers a lot of people, you know? And this is just a vicious cycle. And for what? Like, so that a small degree of landlords, a number of whom are becoming, in this neighborhood, corporations. You're getting companies and corporations, investment firms buying up properties, people just trying to make a quick, people opening those Airbnbs. Like, everything is about making money now to a max. And part of the equation with regular people trying to live, people trying to raise families, that sort of thing is just sort of pushed into a secondary or tertiary position where it's really not what's at play anymore. It's all about the money, and the rest just ends up where it ends up. But there's a simmering resentment going on, you know? Because even if you're not in the street, you may be under threat of ending up on the street at some point if something goes wrong with your income or your housing situation, or you know, you have to live in a neighborhood where all of this is existing. People drifting around, desperate, ready to steal anything that's left outside. People on the street. Obviously, it's an unsanitary, unsightly situation. Like, the right-wingers who are making a big deal out of it and trying to fuel hatred towards the people on the street.
Scapegoating.
They scapegoat them, but I think they're at least right in that it's a terrible situation out there. No one should want that, right? Like, on that part, okay, we all agree there's a catastrophic situation that's been developing for years on our streets. So I'd like to know who was in charge letting this happen. That'd be one thing. You know?
Ford.
Well, a slew of political figures on like, because this isn't just London, Ontario. It's not just Ontario. It's all over the place. The Americans may be facing a worse situation than we are.
Hi, Mary. We're in London, Ontario, Canada, and we're talking about the homeless situation, and the police are about to crack down on people for doing drugs in the street.
Yes.
And if it's legal, it's legal. Like, you know, why criminalize people for just trying to cope and survive? I mean, Are they gonna provide a place for them to go and do stuff, or you know, we need to house people. It saves money, but
Right. These are all issues that I think should be being discussed by people who in the community. If you care about your community, if you care about what's happening, like
Picking up those scraps.
they're gonna start enforcing on people now, which means more people going to jail, more police costs, more police being tied up in small, tedious arrests, more court costs. Like, are the Crown attorneys going to pursue all these charges? Okay, they're going to go and arrest people, but are they actually going to start pursuing all these charges?
and every time somebody gets arrested, they get hurt and traumatized, and if they go and spend a night in EMTC, they could be killed because it's a
Right.
super dangerous place.
Right. I mean, we hadn't even really gotten into the does this really affect things in a way that they're trying to achieve? You know, the police chief will roll out a new approach to tackle open drug use in the city, saying he's heard community concern about the escalating problem. Chief Trong told the police board Wednesday he's working on a range of measures, including arresting people caught doing illicit drugs in public as part of his strategy to make the city safer. There's a lot of concern in the community about public drug use. We know we can't arrest our way out of this, but there are times when it's appropriate to make arrests when individuals are openly using dangerous drugs in the community. So, even in his announcement, he's acknowledging that by now, anyone with a functioning brain who's familiar with this issue knows arrests do not do anything to cure the situation. You look at the states since the Reagan days, what they did was inflated their prison population and became the world's largest jailers. Canada has not followed that path as much as the Americans, but if we're going to start in the middle of a drug epidemic, an addiction epidemic in our community, to start arresting everyone who's seen using drugs, that's a commitment to putting our time, money, resources, effort into punishing these unfortunate people rather than choosing to help them and supply them. You know?
So there's a guy, redneck, blah blah blah. He says, "Hell yeah, brother! Can't do the time, don't do the crime."
Well, I could probably live with that if we were really arresting people that were doing crime everywhere. But if you're rich enough and can afford attorneys and pay people off and have the laws made to benefit you and yours, then it's a different situation than if you're on the street and you're trying to dull the pain of living in one of the most miserable situations imaginable in North America.
And who got them addicted? Like Purdue Pharma convinced doctors their drugs were safe.
How about the Purdue Pharma people? Like, if we're going to start rounding people up, I would probably look at them on my first list, you know? Like, if we want to solve this situation, I think aiming downward is a serious mistake, morally and strategically. We need to punch up. That's, to me, that's always an answer when you're formulating what to do. Aim up. Don't aim down. Don't punish the vulnerable. Don't try and savage the defenseless. Like, why would we want to make their lives even worse? I just don't understand that. It's like people want to punish them for being miserable.
Or trying to survive.
And then the claim to be in a Christian society. Like, I don't claim to be a Christian, but I was raised in a Christian sort of situation. Went to Catholic schools. And, I mean, the part that I did like was what they called preferential treatment of the poor. When you put the more vulnerable and poor and helpless people in your society in a more elevated position of receiving benefit, receiving aid, receiving protection, those sorts of things. The people, like there's some saying, I know I'll screw it up, where you judge a society on how it treats its weakest members.
The most vulnerable.
Most vulnerable members. However it's worded. To me, that's beautiful. Like that's the sort of thing we need to keep in mind. What can we do? Like to me, COVID underlined that. It ended up sort of fizzling down for the most part, but for a while, when most of us were scared and shitting our pants if the end of the world was upon us, it became clear to me that there's only so much you can do in life. And when you're faced with uncertainty and fear, and you have very little control in the situation, being as good as you can to the people who most need it is probably the single best thing most of us can do. So I just think that should be like a principle carrying us forward as we're looking at this situation on the streets. These aren't others. Every time I hear people talking about this, it's them and those people and they, and like I've lost loved ones to this. I've lost people I know, people around me, and these are people in our community. These are members of our community. These are part of our community, and we need to include them. We need to look out for them. We need to protect them. We need to be there as we would for anyone else in our community. I want to protect people with houses. I think their priority comes after the people who don't have houses. That's all. Because sometimes people will get upset at my position of always putting the people on the street first, but that's what it is. Yes, I want to help you if you have a house, but the people over here without a house, I think we should help them first.
The other thing is, what's the government doing to help people? Well, they had Bill 23 where they clawed back millions from municipalities that could have gone towards housing. The 407 owner, I think the owner is from Spain. I mean, the Conservatives privatized that to balance the budget years ago, and it was worth $3 billion, and now it's worth $26 billion. And so they owed Ford $1 billion in taxes, and I believe he forgave all that money. Well, we could have housed people with that. We could have put it towards healthcare. Like our city's got a $150 million deficit in our local hospital system, and they're gonna probably come at us with austerity and cuts but we've been doing that for 30 years. I mean, we lost 2,000 beds in the city.
Well, that was another lesson in COVID for me. Another level of frustration and outrage for me was after hanging out with this guy and hearing about all the cuts they've made to the medical system, what we used to have a fairly wonderful medical health care system in Ontario, all the cuts they made, all the nurses we've lost,
100,000 nursing
all
hours at the bedside.
And then COVID hit, and I would sit and watch the news, and they'd be telling me about how they were getting over flooded. The system can't bear. Our emergency rooms are overflowing. Our hospitals can't take all this. And I would just sit there clenching my teeth, thinking about how we would discuss all the time how if anything happens, the system isn't going to be able to handle it because they're constantly cutting everything back. But the news doesn't frame it to you that way.
Mm-hmm.
So people don't always put the pieces together. But that's what happened. When the shit hit the fan, as the old man would put it, that's what happened. The system no longer had the capacity, the redundancy built in to be able to handle when an overflow comes. And when it comes, now who could have saw that coming, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and it's the same here, same sort of idea. They know what's coming when they flood highly addictive drugs onto our streets, which, if you don't, I was curious, if you're curious how it ever came to be that these highly, highly dangerous addictive drugs were marketed onto our community, onto our streets, how that process ever came to be, there is a wonderful series called Dope Sick that tells the story of how the people behind Purdue Pharmaceuticals manipulated and maneuvered and finagled and bribed.
Finagled, nice word.
I'm not even sure if that's still a word or if that's only an old-timey word. But we're going to stick with it. It seems to suit. But these people set up a situation where some of the most addictive drugs on the planet were sold as safe and effective to the people.
And not addictive.
Not addictive if we do it right, they would say. And then they didn't up the dosage. And then they'd say, you know, you're still good, and then up the dosage some more. And then next thing you know, we had the beginnings of an opioid epidemic raging across North America.
And they took the drugs away because they were worried about people crushing them and injecting them. So they put out Oxy Neo, which you couldn't crush because it became liquid and spoiled. So all these people that were using it before suddenly had no place to go to get injectable drugs, even though they were doing it in a way it wasn't meant to be used. You know, they had to go on the streets and get stuff, and it made it super dangerous. And so we started having safe injection sites. We started having safe supply, and for people on the front lines, doctors, nurses, they're saying it saves lives. It keeps people in the system and gives them a chance to actually get the help they needed when they need it. But as soon as you start, you know, forcing them to get treatment and stuff, like Polly Ever's talking about,
like they're all talking about now,
you're going to push these people away underground, and they're just going to die in the streets.
We know a few things about addiction now. You don't have to be an expert to know a handful of things that really matter. One is, you can't force. You can't. You want to. It's frustrating. I've dealt with it on a personal level, as well as in my community. You cannot just grab them by the scruff of the neck and drag them in and get them to get help. It doesn't work that way. You can't. You can't shame them into it. You can't even reason them into it, because it just doesn't work that way. Addiction is a particular beast, and it doesn't work that way. They can huff and puff, and I think they already know it doesn't work that way, but it's politically convenient for them to act like it does. 24 minutes, okay. So we got a couple more minutes?
Sure, we can
and
go
then we're
another
gonna
5 or 10, and then we'll switch to a different
So maybe
platform.
just to wrap up on this one, our position, I think, my position is, I definitely 100% do not think enforcing on these drugs, I don't think on any drugs really, but especially if we're talking about going after people on the street, I don't think that's productive, and I think it's a problem tactically and morally. It's wrong to be making these people's lives even worse, and I don't think, as much as they want to wish and rub on that lamp, it's not, the miracle ain't gonna happen. It's not gonna work in the way that they're selling. The people that are believing that this is really the path to helping things are delusional. And another thing, you're gonna pay for this no matter what. We might as well just get people knowing now. There's a big cha-ching coming, because no matter what, you're paying for something. You're gonna pay for it in tax money, you're gonna pay for it in effort and time, and you're either gonna help people and help them out of these situations as best as possible according to what makes sense, or you're gonna have police budgets, court budgets, jail and prison budgets. Either way.
If we just house people, we'll save money, they'll have their dignity back, we provide wraparound services. Like in Toronto, they've found out that 2 people were costing them $520,000 a year because homeless people just have they're sicker on average.
How much does a prisoner cost you a year?
Exactly. So the cost of being homeless, you're more likely to have serious illnesses, and you're 93% likely to be admitted if you go to a hospital, which is not the case for most of the population. You're costing the system twice as much and staying twice as long as the average person. So the St. Michael's, I think in Toronto, or one of the hospitals, did this groundbreaking project where they paid for housing for 51 people. So they're housing 51 people that are frequent flyers at the hospital. That's not meant to be derogatory at all, because people are just trying to survive.
That's right.
But it's groundbreaking, and Dr. Forchuk did some did this research with the Lawson Institute here in London. She's a doctor in mental health, and she's looking at substance use disorder, homelessness, and healthcare use, and she found that homeless people use the system a lot more, cost a lot more. So let's do what Finland has done. Finland said it did a study and it saved money to house people. So let's do that and actually save money.
Like one final word. I think we need to wrap up here. To me, any effort to withhold shelter and needed goods from people anywhere, but especially up here in the Great White North, it's morally wrong and should be criminal. And I think any effort to alleviate that should be seen as a form of self-defense, a form of survival. And we need to start protecting the people on our streets, not criminalizing them and sending them off to jail to become more criminalized.
And
maybe leave it at that.
Roosevelt had a good idea. Like, he had a second Bill of Rights before he died, before he could implement it. And that second Bill of Rights guaranteed people, I believe, housing and health care and jobs. So, we need 3 parties in Canada at all levels of government to be doing this. And also the UN Declaration of Human Rights that was written in Montreal, Article 25 says housing's a human right. And we signed it, but we're not doing it. So I think we should put together, I'd like to put together a criminal challenge suing the government, saying, look, you signed up for this and you're not doing it. So you're gonna provide housing using the Canadian Mortgage Housing Corporation. Okay, cheers, folks. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for checking us out. We'll get back to you soon.
Our massive following. We're bringing down the internet because so many people are
The
liking.
Anarchist and the Moderate.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thanks. Have a good day.